Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to see you all here in Santa Fe and to be meeting many of you in person for the first time in a very long time. Over the next 4 days, elected officials from across the nation and across the aisle will be meeting to discuss some of the most important and most challenging issues that we face today. And before I continue on, I should probably start by introducing myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Hurtado, State Senator for California. I represent Senate District 14, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. So though we faced many issues prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, many were brought more prominently into focus with this pandemic. One of the issues that we are here to address is how to prepare for a transforming workplace and workforce. As co-chair of the Economic and Workforce Health Subcommittee, I would like to welcome you to the conference and to this session hosted by our subcommittee, The Workforce of Tomorrow. We are pleased to have 4 other members of the subcommittee here as well. Representative David Benz from Delaware, I think should be coming in shortly. Representative Sean Bordeaux from South Dakota. Dr. Sharice Childers, Director of the Arkansas Division of Workforce Services. And Senator Mary Kunish from Minnesota. Employers and employees today are facing a new era of opportunity and uncertainty as the lasting impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic really began to start revealing themselves. The ability to transition certain segments of the workforce into working remotely allowed many private and public sector workers to stay safe and keep those around them safe, while continuing to work as productively as they previously had in office settings right from home. Remote work presents opportunity for employees and employers. It reduces overhead costs for employers and provides enhanced flexibility for employees, and particularly around childcare options and use of free time. At the same time, not all industries have the capability or desire to allow for remote work at all or in an indefinite basis. And it isn't necessarily fair to ask them to do so. In that same vein, we are seeing workers who are having to reevaluate their priorities during this pandemic, or choosing to pursue jobs that provide them with the flexibility they desire and leave jobs that don't. Or having had the opportunity to pursue pet projects, spend more time on potentially profitable hobby, or take time to learn a new skill, have the confidence to quit their jobs and take a risk on themselves. And perhaps the largest driver, there has been an uptick in workers that have decided to retire early. The pandemic and the remote work providing incentive to do so. This has created a workforce shortage felt globally and throughout the United States, but in some places felt more pronounced than others. Recent statistics released by the U.S. Department of Labor indicated that in August there were approximately 10.4 million jobs that remained to be filled. While the number of those leaving their jobs rose to 4.3 million, this is the highest quit rate level on record dating back to December 2000. Reports indicate that these shortages are being felt more intensely in less urban states where more positions may lend themselves to turnover. Further, over half of public and private sector workers have indicated that they have or will consider changing jobs in the coming months. This uncertainty hampers global and local supply chains, disrupting economic growth and market dependability for consumers. And I have seen these impacts directly in my Senate district. And with us today, we got some stellar workforce experts joining us on the stage to discuss current state's workforce challenges and opportunities. And it's my honor to introduce them now. First, we have CSG National Task Force member and director of the Arkansas Division of Workforce Services, Dr. Sharice Childers. Dr. Childers directs the Arkansas workforce system, which includes most of the U.S. Department of Labor, federal employment and training programs, and grants along with adult education, Arkansas's rehabilitation services, and services for the blind. She previously served as a director of the Arkansas Department of Career Education as well. Dr. Childers also serves as a member of the CSG Healthy States National Task Force. Dr. Childers, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. And next we have Melissa Johnson, Director of State Strategies for the National Skills Coalition, a national organization fighting for inclusive, high-quality skills training for workers. At the National Skills Coalition, Melissa leads the organization's efforts to advance workforce policy solutions at the state level. She oversees the development of the National Skills Coalition States Policy Agenda and works with the organization's network of state coalitions and partners to provide strategic guidance for policy development, advocacy, advancement, and implementation. Melissa, thanks for joining the panel. Also joining us, we have Mary Lefebvre, Program Director with ACT State Government Relations. In this role, Mary provides education and workforce development expertise and government relations support at the federal, state, and local level. Prior to joining ACT in 2010, Mary was a workforce research manager at the Missouri Economic Research and Information Center within the Missouri Department of Economic Development, where she provided statewide and local leadership for education and workforce research and statewide workforce initiatives. Mary, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Finally, we have from the great state of New Mexico, Dr. Riley White. Dr. Riley White is the Assistant Dean of Teaching and Learning and Associate Professor of Finance at the University of New Mexico. Dr. White also serves on the board of the CFA Society of New Mexico, is the advisor for the $5 million student-run University of New Mexico's Regents portfolio, and leads a series of financial literacy projects in the community. For the last decade, he has consulted with investment managers, nonprofits, and municipal governments on budgetary and economic strategies in response to economic and labor challenges. Dr. White, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And our first question for today is for Dr. White. We convened this panel to discuss workforce participation. So I think it's appropriate to begin with a question that asks, what are some factors behind the national labor shortage?
Thank you so much, Senator. It's an honor to be here. And I want to thank you all for coming to our great state of New Mexico and coming here and visiting us here. We are so happy to have you. It is so meaningful to see so many people involved in public work here. So to kind of overview this, we've been through an unprecedented year and a half that has created this labor shortage. Back in March 2020, roughly 17 million workers lost their jobs. That's the highest level that we have on record. It is unprecedented, that level. And in response, from a policy perspective, there was an unprecedented policy response. Over $5 trillion of stimulus money, about 1/4 of our GDP.
Excuse me, would you speak into the microphone,
Oh, yes.
please?
Am I too far out? How's this? Can you hear me now? Or is it a decorative microphone? I'm used to lecturing, so I can just shout at you. Is this going to work? It's not on. It appears to be on. It's a decorative microphone. I apologize.
That's on.
I feel it. This is the worst karaoke night I've ever had. Thank you so much. I apologize. We'll pass this. It's a placebo mic. Thank you. Is this a little bit better? Can you hear me? All right. Thank you. Yay! Academics. Let's start with academics first. One of those things. So anyway, we've been through, to get a recap about this, thank you for your patience. Last year and a half, we've been through quite a battle. We had 17 million unemployed workers. We saw a $5 trillion initiative, 1/4 of our GDP go into rebuilding the economy. That resulted in a surge of growth, but the growth was uneven, to give you a sense of this. Right now, we stand at an interesting juncture. Okay, cool.
That works fine.
All right, that was good. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. So right now, one of the things that has unfortunately leveled off is our workforce participation rate. Workforce participation measures the amount of our workforce that above the age of 16 that are actively working. Right now, it's been kind of hovering steady around 61.6%. Before the pandemic, it was above 63%. Now, there's a couple big factors into this. We're missing, in other words, about 4 million workers from where we were prior to the pandemic. Those are highly significant numbers. Whoa, there we go. Let's try this again. All right, I apologize if you have tinnitus. I apologize. One thing. So participation has dropped across the board, specific to individual sectors. It is uneven. Participation among women in the workforce has dropped. Participation among non-college educated workers has dropped. Low-paying industries, such as leisure and hospitality, have also dropped. So with these 4 million fewer workers, there's some explanation to why this labor force, or where they've gone, where are they missing, et cetera, et cetera. So we estimate that maybe 1.5 million workers over the age of 55 retired early. Now this is a substantial number. This number are experienced workers who've gone through the process. They've seen, they have life experience and other factors that work to their advantage. On the other end, to the point of the senator, the quit rate, the number of people who are quitting their jobs is at the highest level we've actually ever recorded. Roughly 3% in any given month in the last month quit their jobs. That's about 4.5 million employees. This was job openings remain at near the all-time high that was reached this summer, which is over 10 million. Border closings during the pandemic have also reduced the availability of immigrant workers. About 1/5 of the world's migrants live in the United States. That's about 45 million people. 1 million people obtained permanent residency here in 2019. That dropped 30% in 2020. Non-immigrant visas were 60% lower in 2020 than in 2016. Child care and elder care in this very town in Santa Fe. Everyone knows when we look at the question of participation, for many working people, it's the availability of child care in some way for their children. Here in New Mexico, in Santa Fe itself, 6 child care facilities closed in the last year. That's significant, and as a father of a 7-year-old, it is impossible to find child care in any capacity. Participation in this rate disproportionately affected women. There are 10% fewer people working in child care right now than ever before. Likewise, there are 66,000 H-2B visas available per year for non-agricultural seasonal workers. Often, this process is expensive and onerous for U.S. employees to take part of. In combination, and any one of these individual factors could be remedied in combination. Collectively, this results in a persistent labor shortage that will affect a lot of, it's both private and public sector operations over the next year.
Thank you, Dr. White. And I know there's probably a lot of questions out there, and I'm going to ask if you please hold on to them till the end of the panel, and we'll go ahead and start answering your questions. But moving on to question number 2, goes for Melissa. How can states use job training programs to support individuals who temporarily exited the labor force during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you so much for that question. Can you all hear me, first of all? I'm not a professor, so I'm going to do my best to channel my inner professor and project. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you so much for having me, because I feel like this is the question that states have been wrestling with the most, and there is so much to do, as Dr. White alluded to. So back in September, National Skills Coalition, we released our Skills for an Inclusive Economic Recovery report. And the report included an 8-part policy agenda that both states and the federal government can use to build an inclusive economic recovery that workers and businesses can both participate in. And I'm not going to go through all 8 parts. You all can go to nationalskillscoalition.org for more information on that, and I'm happy to share that afterwards. But I just wanted to lift up a few examples from that report. So the second part of that policy agenda was guaranteeing income, health care, training, and reemployment support for any worker who loses a job due to economic disruptions like pandemics, automation, or trade. And just for an example from our recent past about how states have tackled this, Michigan, of course, during the 2008 recession, launched its No Worker Left Behind initiative, and that provided workers with training benefits of up to $5,000 for 2 years. That benefited over 150,000 workers. And they enrolled in training through that program. And because of that, Michigan had more workers participating in training. I believe the rate was 75% were participating in training compared to 25% of workers nationally. So that's one example. The third piece of that policy agenda was ensuring that job creation efforts in infrastructure, defined very broadly, include investments in skills for long-term workers. So when we talk about infrastructure, I'm also talking about not only hard infrastructure, but our care infrastructure and our healthcare infrastructure, right? So as an example of this, we all remember contact tracers, right? And our push to staff up for contact tracers. The Chicago Department of Health invested $56 million in 2-year grants for community-based organizations to help build basically a contact tracer core, but not only to fill those immediate positions, but they partner with those community-based organizations so that people were not only trained for those positions, but also connected to longer-term careers in quality careers. And of course, we all want them to be long-term in healthcare, because that is also where we were experiencing a worker shortage even pre-COVID, right? And then the final one that I'll highlight is eliminating barriers to high-quality digital learning. And we all know that because of the specific nature of this pandemic and the fact that most of us have done all of our work remotely for the past almost 2 years now, that has just accelerated automation in some cases and accelerated the need for digital learning. And there's, of course, things that states can do to help expand access to that. A quick example of that is in the budget that the Texas House just passed, they included some language there to add digital literacy to their scopes of education for their adult education programs. The Texas Workforce Commission is also collecting unemployment insurance data and disaggregating that data so they can better target digital literacy and education to the people who need it the most. And then they are also maximizing all federal funding streams to support digital literacy and inclusion. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. And Dr. Childers, how are current workforce challenges playing out in Arkansas? For individuals who have yet to return to the workforce, what are the most common reasons?
Okay, thank you all for being here. And as a former teacher, I will use my teacher voice, a nice one instead of a loud one, but hopefully you can hear me. Thank you for the question, and thank you all for being here. I especially want to express appreciation to those that are here from Arkansas, representatives and senators that are attending this session. And some of the information that they will hear, they've heard me say before. As the director of the Division of Workforce Services and previously the director of career education that housed adult education and career and technical education, as well as the Office of Skills Development, where we offered training grants for employers, now have the opportunity to work with all of our WIOA partners and keep a pulse on what's going on in CTE as much as possible, career and technical education at the secondary and post-secondary level, because all of those things are issues and challenges for us as we move past the pandemic and back to what I guess we could call normal, except that what I want to bring to your attention is that what we've forgotten is that we were not at full employment, and we were seeing some of the issues that are being expressed today just on a larger scale. We were seeing those back in 2019 prior to the pandemic. You've heard that from when in the conversation about the labor participation rate. You heard about that earlier from Dan White from Moody's Analytics. If you were not able to attend the lunch session today, I'm hopeful that you can at least get the Cliff Notes version of that, because that's what I'm going to encourage you to do as you go back to your states and look at your specific data, specifically to your unemployment, your labor force, your employment and unemployment, your unemployment rate, but taking into consideration that that's not a true reflection of your labor force and availability of workers. And then what was brought to our attention today, the employment to population ratio, which is very interesting as well to look at, as well as your labor participation rate. So what we're seeing in Arkansas, our challenges again are what we saw before: skills gap, which was something that was of utmost importance prior to the pandemic. And then we were also seeing a people gap. And so that has just grown and become even more of an issue as baby boomers are retiring. We expected that. We knew that was coming. However, those that chose to retire that maybe would have stayed in the workforce a little bit longer, that rate has increased. And then also those that decided to retire and are not planning on returning to the workforce in any other capacity. So we have, that creates vacancies and skill sets that are very difficult to replace. So we're seeing that. And then the people gap that was talked about before, that is part of the baby boomer result, that we're seeing that too fewer workers relative to demand. So we had that prior to the pandemic. Also, we are seeing that employers are probably just at a higher level of frustration than they were in 2019. So we're hearing from them more. They are expressing their frustration because it's just gone on for so long, and they're trying to find answers and trying to find solutions. Now, I will say on a positive note, it's probably caused them to look at what they actually do need to operate their business, and looking at ways to consider remote work if possible, and to consider other technology that could be used so that they can accommodate those workers that, one, are no longer working because of concerns for health for themselves or their family. Their desire for better or higher pay, or a better or different job. Also, quality child care, or even availability of child care, is limited. We see child care entities that are not able to go back and open up their child care facility because they can't find the workers. I will say one thing that you do hear is about your minimum wage in your states. And fortunately in Arkansas, we have one of the highest minimum wage rates in our surrounding states and in the country. So that could be a factor, but I don't see that as an issue so much in Arkansas, except that we are increasing the requirements and skill levels for jobs, but maybe the pay is not increasing with that. Also, we are seeing, as was demonstrated in the PowerPoint given at lunch, we're seeing that individuals have sufficient funds to sustain their standard of living. So with the stimulus checks, with the child care tax credits, with the funding that they received through unemployment insurance, all of those things are giving them discretionary funds and more savings than they've had in the past. So they've chosen to make decisions for their family that they can work with, and also deal with the child care issues that they're facing. One example, I was told last week of an individual at one of our larger companies in Arkansas. And of course in Arkansas we have the headquarters of Walmart, Tyson, and other large companies that depend on workers specifically for logistics and for retail, and then also for production and manufacturing. And so this individual was hired to start at one of those employers in an upper level position. And the day that she was supposed to report for work, she comes to a town, she knows no one. She could not find childcare from the day that she arrived to town until the time at which she was to show up for work on her first day. So she missed her first day of work, in a management position at one of our plants. I'm hoping, I'll talk about that later, but I'm hoping that will incentivize and encourage that plant, that facility, to at least look at options for childcare for their workers.
Thank you. And this question is for you, Mary. What are some promising state strategies for supporting worker reentry into the workforce?
Okay, can y'all hear me? Good stuff. First of all, I want to say thank you for everybody for choosing this wonderful session for your post-lunch session. I know that can be difficult sometimes. I definitely get a little sleepy after a very good New Mexican lunch. So first of all, I just want to kind of say that you might be wondering why on earth is somebody from ACT, the college testing company, here on a panel talking about workforce issues. So in addition to the background that I had in my career before working at ACT, you might not know that the company has actually been in the workforce development space for the past 30 years. And so in addition to measuring what it takes to be ready for college, we've been doing the same thing for 30 years in the career space. So getting that out of the way. So back to the question, I'm going to get pretty specific in the type of best practice example that I think really states should be really embracing as a strategy for post-COVID worker reentry. And it's really addressing one of the many data points, wonderful data points that Dr. White shared, which was about the extremely low labor force participation for women, and more specifically minority women. And I just kind of want to take everybody back to March of 2020. Everything started going sideways. I was very fortunate in that I was already working remotely from home. So my ability to earn money was not dependent on my ability to show up in a time and a place where I wasn't quite sure if I was going to be safe. Same thing with my kids. And I was also very fortunate that I was able to help out with my kids in the homeschooling that they needed at the time. There were so many families that did not have that option. Okay, maybe some of you in this room too. And by our estimates, when we did our own research, about 68% of the jobs in the US did not have that luxury, right? And so the best practice example that I'm going to lift up that I would really love to see adopted more in state policy has to do with a concept that's not new. A lot of great policies are not necessarily new ideas, but two-generation strategies. And for those of you who are not familiar with the concept, if you think about state and federal services when they're offered to individuals, whether it's for unemployment services, child care services, education, training services, they're all siloed for the most part, right, in terms of how they're delivered. Two-generation strategies are multi-generational strategies used to address historically poverty and breaking that cycle for parents and their children at the same time. And there's a great example in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I live, in Oklahoma City, home state of Oklahoma. If anybody's here, raise your hand. Yay. But the idea is that you're providing training and services for the parent at the same location where their child is already receiving maybe an early education. And the science behind it is pretty robust in that when you reemphasize the importance of learning to an adult at the same time that their child is going through an education program, they mutually reinforce each other. And above and beyond that, it's addressing some of the barriers for working parents in terms of being able to access training, in that they can't leave their job, they can't leave their child somewhere else outside of childcare. So you're meeting them where they're at, basically. That's the concept. And the concept is bigger than just early childhood and adult education. But I would really love to see more states embracing two-generation strategies. There's ample research and policy recommendations that are out there. I believe probably NSC probably has some stuff on there too. But it's a concept that we really think could really help address, again, that one data point. There's so many data points to go over today, and we'll get into some others. But that's a great strategy, again, around worker retraining for individuals who are really hamstrung in terms of being able to just drop everything and go to a worker training program. And so that was the example I'd give on that one.
Thank you. And the next question is for you, Dr. White. Based on your research and past episodes of economic turbulence, how long do you expect the labor shortage will last?
This is what a delight. That's a wonderful question. All right, so first, one way, when we look at the financial and economics field, economists were polled on this very question. They said, when will we recover these jobs? 40% said that the job losses were basically permanent. 40%. And so the answer I'm going to give acknowledges that this is a divisive issue. It acknowledges that there is uncertainty still. And the best part about being an academic is we start writing about it now, we'll come up with a solution in 10 to 20 years. But that's the problem. So let me break it down a little bit in a couple of ways for what we know and kind of give you a perspective on this. In economic turbulence or economic recessions, this has the effect of typically accelerating workforce changes that might already be happening prior to the pandemic. In some ways, this makes it difficult. There's no going back to the past any more than there is no going back to the same way that we structure jobs, employment, and situations in certain ways. Firing is very quick. Hiring takes a long time. We've done a new experiment in the last couple of years. We've said how much, if we inject a lot of money into the economy, how quickly can we recover from an economic shock? How meaningfully will that recovery be? But we found that there are shortages. As the rest of the panel has indicated, there's a difference between the skills that employers are saying they need and the skills that are offered or available to the current workforce. And there are reasons behind that. These are long-term solutions that require a great deal of information and direct policy measures. In other sectors, so basically, in short, in the next year, we should see some of the immediate problems go away. Supply chain shortages will extend for complex products maybe as late as 2023. Labor shortages in the next year or two, in that sense, in the rough sense of it, are going to continue. But there's also long-term dynamics to the labor force that are happening. We talked about participation rate. It peaked in the United States in 2000 with 67% of the population employed. That's 21 years ago now. And since that time, every time we have a recession, the 2008 recession is a good example of this, participation rate dropped. We never got the jobs back that we had before the recession. People moved on and did different things. People do different things. Skills move. The same industries that are hiring now are not going to be the same industries that hire in 10 or 20 years down the line. So regarding the general sense of this question, in the next year and a half, we're going to see a lot of resolution to some of these immediate issues. Wages are coming up at a high rate. Usually that has an effect of alleviating job issues. But there's also questions about the way that we replace workers, the way that we train workers, the way that we engage workers meaningfully to provide them with certain aspects. And there's the question of retirees, changing demographics, as was noted by this very panel. We have more baby boomers and they're going to retire. That's going to put a downward drag on the labor force. But at the same time, we have another series of data that says that the average American is woefully unprepared for retirement. There will be second careers for many individuals. The way that we look at and evaluate the labor market will probably drastically change in the next 10 or 20 years. But some things will remain consistent. Automation, changes in roles, and other things will likely accelerate, but this also takes time. Solutions to these problems, which in many cases were drawn out over the last 2008 recession, are not going to be available in the next year. But you should see some relief on the horizon, but the labor market will not look the same as it did before the pandemic.
Very interesting. And our next question is for Mary. What are key trends in workforce policies being implemented in response to COVID-19?
Okay, so I've got two different examples of, I would say, policy trends I would point out to you all in the workforce space. One is basically focused on the recognition, it was a great setup, Dr. White, that the shift, again, in the labor force is, I don't want to say completely due, but I mean so many of those quits, people quitting their job, it's because they're doing something different. They want to do something different, right? It might not be a second career. It might just be an acknowledgement that what they were doing before was not what they want to be doing in the future. And I think it's pretty consistently understood that, again, the reskilling, and I'm getting some feedback here, that reskilling has to happen at an accelerated pace in order for economic recovery to be robust throughout all the states. and that we can't, again, just as much as we can't look in the past, we can't look at the past for the way that we reskilled and retrained in the past. It's just, it's not going to suffice anymore. You have way too many adults who already had a first pass through the education system, and so trying to serve them again in the same way, assuming that they had no skills or training or education under their belt, it's just not going to suffice. And so the first policy trend that I see is just that acknowledgement of recognition of prior learning, also referred to as prior learning assessment, and credit for prior learning. All those three phrases are used. That it really, these are policies that institutions can adopt. There are some states that have statewide policies in place to enable it to happen at an institutional level. But the idea is that you're acknowledging the learning that that happened outside the classroom. And it could be in the form of just providing credit that a person has earned. It could be toward completion of a degree or credential, even outside of awarding credit. But the idea is that you're acknowledging, again, all that learning and knowledge and skill sets that existed before that person stepped foot on your institution, okay? And there's really good research. Again, Witchy and Kale have done some really great work in this space, showing that for adults especially that take advantage of PLA policies, they have higher degree completion rates, almost twice the rate of completion, which is always kind of a sore spot for adults going back into post-secondary, that they actually have reduced time to complete that credential or degree program, and that they actually earn more credit at the institution itself, to the equivalent of almost a semester on average. And so it benefits the student, benefits the institution, benefits the state and the local economy that could benefit from a reskilled, retooled workforce in a shorter period of time for less money. Sounds like magic, right? Well, these policies are really difficult to implement, okay? And one of the things that you can remove as a barrier at a state level are barriers around financial aid, often which cannot be used to pay for PLA credit processes. Usually that falls on the individual. So that's something that you can remove barriers for individuals. The other thing I want to say in terms of the best practice that I'm seeing in workforce policy is just the acknowledgement that employers necessarily are going to have to play a larger role in workforce training. Training their talent pipeline, the current and the emerging workforce that they are going to need in their local industry or community. And as part of that, state policymakers can really create policies to remove regulatory barriers. Like there's a lot of great work that's already being done around licensure reform, right? But making sure that you're really removing those barriers, also maybe around like youth participation in apprenticeship programs and on-the-job training programs that employers could sponsor, but legally they can't provide training to anybody under the age of 18 because of the type of industry they're in. So again, looking at barriers to employers being able to provide more on-the-job training experiences, apprenticeship programs for youth while they're still in high school before they graduate, paying them for that training, and creating yourself a pipeline of talent before they even complete school. And these are just, again, some examples of things that are being done. I could go on about great programs that are being used to diversify basically the training pool of workers into construction and trades programs, which I think with some of the more recent federal investments, we're going to have to look at expanding that population to more women, more minorities. But again, you're going to have to address, again, foundational skill gaps to make sure that, again, when you're expanding these programs, these people are set up for success for completion of them. And so I'll wrap up with that. Thanks.
Thank you. And on that note, my next question is for Melissa. What are some promising state skills training programs?
So there are a number of promising programs, and I'll just highlight a few. I'm going to start basically in my fellow panelists' backyard in Arkansas. The Arkansas Career Pathways Program is one that I always like to uplift and highlight because it is a program targeted to parents using temporary assistance for needy families dollars, federal grant that each state gets, and it has they've done an independent ROI study, like the gold standard, which every program had it, and they've found that for every dollar invested in that program, the state gets $1.79 in terms of added tax revenue because they are supporting these parents with low incomes and training for high demand, high wage industries and jobs. And the program connects those parents with counselors and case managers who are able to coordinate their supports, and has really done a great job in helping to close some racial equity gaps. So we know that because of that same study, that African American students, they were able to earn degrees and certificates at a higher rate in the program than their similarly situated students in community college programs. And that rate was even higher. The difference between the completion rates was even higher for Latino participants. So that is one program that I like to highlight. And I definitely appreciate Mary's point that these programs were promising programs even before COVID, and as Dr. White said, a lot of what we're experiencing now is just the acceleration of some trends. So it's in a lot of ways, it's time to just recommit, double down, triple down on promising practices. Tennessee Reconnect is another program that I'll highlight. The Tennessee Reconnect, through the Tennessee Reconnect grant, the state has basically made attending community college effectively free for any adult in the state. And that program was just copied by Michigan. So Michigan now has a Reconnect program as well. For anyone 25 plus, they can attend community college free. It's a last dollar scholarship program, so they're capitalizing on federal dollars coming into the state for Pell Grants as well. And then the last example that I'll highlight and picks up too on more employer participation is a sector partnership program. So the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership in Indiana is a sector partnership. It's convened by the one of their regional workforce investment boards, and it launched in 2012 with 20 employers in their manufacturing sector. And they sit down with their human services partners and community-based organizations. And the employers are identifying their training needs, and their human services partners know what the barriers are and how to address some of the barriers like childcare. And they're helping to fill some of the needs in manufacturing. And in between 2014 and 2019, about 723 people participated in that program, and the program that targeted long-term unemployed adults. Of those 723 participants, about 686 were hired after that training. So that is just one example of an effective sector partnership. There are many other examples. I just want to highlight sector partnerships generally because there are so many ways to layer some of these policy solutions to bring in childcare and employer participation and highlighting in-demand skills, and sector partnerships are a great way of doing that.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. I know on my end I have a lot of questions, but I really want to give an opportunity and open things up to the audience for questions and answers. So what questions do we have any questions from the audience? Feel free to come up to the mic.
Hi, my name is Rob Trombley. I'm at the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the Department of Labor. So this question is kind of framed with the disability lens. we've talked a lot about the workforce shortage, but it seems to me like we've lost 750,000 people to COVID, 100,000 people have died from the opioid crisis. The mortality rates in the country are increased even beyond COVID. We also had 48 million people infected with COVID, and some studies showing up to a third may have a disability of long COVID beyond their infection. And I'm wondering, what are you seeing in the data in terms of workforce participation that might indicate with individuals with disabilities that can no longer perform the same work that they did before, or be in the same profession that they had before? And I know at ODEP we've done retain, which is a return to work from illness or injury, to try to coordinate medical care to get people back into the workforce. So I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of the data with disability, disability insurance claims, and when we're talking about these workforce training programs and reskilling, that reskilling should also be coordinated with medical care and care that allows people to get back into the workforce. And so I don't think it's as simple as just a traditional reskilling program. And I think we're in a unique situation here. So I want to hear your perspective of what you're seeing in the data. I know it's still very early and a lot of these are lagging indicators, but you can have people who may no longer be able to walk up a flight of stairs. Their career is going to look a lot different now. So I'm wondering what states are doing or what you're seeing that could potentially account for we'll have a large number of people with disabilities that may need to return to the workforce and without support may not.
That's a fantastic question, and I'll take an early stab at this, and then I'll defer to some specifics from the incredible board members here in front here. And I want to sort of go off in this, and it reminds me what you said, looking at the way that disabilities, and particularly that people with disabilities have or do not have the opportunities to achieve some workforce success. I want to go over one of the things that's come out recently. There's a recent paper in the Harvard Business Review. And this was a team that was led by Joseph Fuller, Manjari Raman, Eve Sage Gavin, and Kristen Hines. They looked at something called Hidden Workers, Untapped Talent is the name of it. And I encourage you to take a look at it. It's a very easy read, I promise you. It's not an academic, verbose paper. But in this paper, basically the authors argue that the systems in place across widespread numbers of firms over-constrain potential applicants. So the idea is we're overlooking potentially, their number was 27 million workers from being reasonably allowed to apply. And to your point about citizens we have with disabilities, we're looking at 99% of Fortune 500 companies. 99%. That's not. It sounds like a hyperbolic question. It's actually it's a number that they use. 90% of Fortune 500 companies use AI software to screen applicants as they apply. And how do they screen applicants? About half of them. Half of all firms have application screenings where if you have an unexplained 6-month period where you're not working, you're automatically excluded from consideration by that employer. And so the interesting part about this is there is an absolute need, and I'll let them speak to the other aspects of this presentation that are specific, to filter, to not exclude applicants who have these factors, training gaps, failure of a lot of firms to elevate the business case for hiring workers that are outside of their boundaries. Many firms view it as like a CSR report, an informational item rather than something that benefits their bottom line. It is beneficial to them to be conscientious and hire workers. It's a competitive advantage. Refresh job descriptions, make filters affirmative rather than negative in the way that you screen HR employees, and create new metrics. Metrics. Innovate the way that you look at your HR systems across the board to deal with those disability issues as well. And then to speak to the programming, I defer to the board.
Thank you, Dr. White. Those are very good comments. And just from the a state perspective, within Arkansas Rehabilitation Services, we began prior to the pandemic working closer with employers, giving them the opportunity to understand the benefits of hiring an individual with a disability, all of their work ethic, their dependability, things that are positive for the population that we serve in Arkansas. So we started working with them. We're also just doing cold calls, reaching out to them to give them, to ask for a meeting with them so that we can introduce them to what we have to offer to support them. So within the state of Arkansas, we have accommodations that we can provide for those individuals that are seeking employment, and then also the employer, from the employer side, those employers that are interested. And that was one of the comments that I was going to make later on in our session today, is that we are seeing employers look at other options, other sectors of the labor force that they may not have considered in the past, including those with felonies. So Walmart started an initiative about 3 years ago. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. They did some testing in a state actually outside of Arkansas, where they removed the box from their application as to whether or not you had a felony offense. And what they did was allow that person to apply, and then proceeded with saying, we will ask that question and it will come out, but first we want to give you the opportunity to apply for the job and see if we can move you to the next step, which would be an interview. And so those are things now that we're seeing in other industries. As far as what we're seeing because of COVID-related reasons or disabilities or similar issues related to COVID, we don't have that data yet. As far as I know, we're not seeing that in Arkansas yet with our current numbers. I'm just comparing October 2021 preliminary numbers with October 2019. Our employment, we have about 10,000 fewer workers in our civilian labor force that are employed. We have about 12,973 that are unemployed. And so we're looking at our unemployment rate is almost back to where, if you're just using the unemployment rate as a factor. But we're also seeing the labor participation rate back to the 2019 level, and we're real close to the employment to population ratio being back to October 2019 levels. I know that will be something that may occur down the road as we have individuals that choose to not return to work, even if they're provided their same job and same working conditions without accommodations. That may not be possible for them. So I would encourage states to look at your policies within what you're doing with your voc rehab, vocational rehabilitation, and those agencies that house those funds and also those programs.
Thank you. And we have another question lined up.
Hi, everyone. Dina Klinkina, I'm the program director of our education and workforce team at CSG. I did want to add one little comment here. So we actually have a lot of really great resources on disability employment policy, as well as the future of work, specifically for individuals with disabilities, that actually address some of the things like bias of algorithms and apprenticeships, things like that. So if you're interested, we'd love to share our state exchange on employment and disability resources with you. And we have a lot of other experts here in the back of the room on inclusive apprenticeships as well as other disability issues. So please, if you're interested, let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions from the audience? No? Okay. Okay, we have one more.
Thank you. I'm Jennifer Boysko. I serve in the Senate of Virginia, and one of the things that we haven't talked about is how the workforce has changed for the 20-something people who are in the gig economy. I can tell you that my daughter, who is a college graduate, has 3 jobs, no benefits, no retirement, no security. She works hourly at each of them, and she feels like she's being successful, and we see that increasingly in the Gen Z generation. And I'm wondering, have you all done any analysis on the long-term effects that that's going to have, and how we will address as that group continues to move up?
I'm going to try to take a little stab at this, and I'm going to pass the mic real fast. So I'm going to say that in my opinion, the numbers that we have around the gig economy are not great. And a lot of that has to do with the sources of the information that they're pulling the data from. So like a lot of the employment data we get is from unemployment insurance data collection systems, which necessarily only apply to people who, you know, fill out a certain tax form for their employer. If you're filling out, you know, something other than a W-4, then you're not going to be you're not going to be counted. And so I would just say that the data is not great in that. So then you get a lot of national surveys that are done. Census might be doing some better work in this area. But in terms of, I guess, the overall trend, we saw, I think, over the last 30 years, an increasingly larger disconnect in the definition of the relationship of what an employee was to an employer. You know, changing, you know, availability of benefits, all kinds of things, right? We're seeing the flip side of that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the flip in what we're seeing with supply and demand of the labor force. So I think it's natural that you're seeing a disconnect, or rather I should say a change in the definition of how individuals maybe in that generation define themselves as being a successful worker. So I'm going to pivot real fast.
I don't think you hit the nail on the head.
I said nothing.
You know, and I just want to concur with that. I think that's a fantastic answer. The gig economy numbers aren't good, and our data on that isn't very well established. That's the problem. We've tried to look at this and get into detail. We have supplemental surveys, other things that we initiate to try to get a sense of it. Often they're very local, very regionalized. And when we think about long-term effects about these things, it does result in a lot of other lasting effects that do need to be addressed, right? So we know that people who are outside of systems in this manner, there's questions around financial literacy, the ability and access of individuals who are operating in the gig economy, often underinvest in things like retirement, other things that become fundamentally important as time goes on. There is a great need for financial education in this sphere, particularly around the ability of that information. But so I see the gig economy as an important, and we have many manifestations of that here in New Mexico. We have workers who operate informally across markets and other places, and we have individuals who are really, it's harnessing an entrepreneurial culture, which is a very dynamic thing. But at the same time, there's a lot of questions about its sustainability and its ability to grow. Those resources are often insufficient. And so that's where I'm going with that, but I appreciate it.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, so please go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Christine from Denver, Colorado, and I'm with Dexcom. Amazing panel today. It's super fascinating and personally very interested in this. But so you were talking about incentives to get people back into the workforce, and someone mentioned the gig economy and the younger workers, and I feel as if the 4-day work week is almost what work from home used to be. So now working from home options, if they are available, is almost the minimum that an employer can do for a lot of desk jobs. Just wondering your thoughts on the 4-day work week, if that could incentivize more people to come back to work, and because I know some countries are piloting this, like Ireland and Spain, and just wondering your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll pass it. Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is that, I mean, if the numbers show that about a third of jobs can be done completely remotely, then at least for 30% of the jobs, I don't see what barriers there would be for effective job performance to go to a 4-day work week. I know of no research done on that at large scale, but I'm going to pass it.
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between a 4-day work week and then remote work. Just to start this off, within the State Agency of Workforce Services, we have a flexible schedule where individuals can choose a 4-day work week. So they're working from their office at our agency or across the state, but they've chosen their hours so that they work 4 days, or they rotate one every other Friday or every other Monday. So we've had those options. I would say with remote work, we're just learning a lot about that. There are some states, I know that the Division of Human Services within Oklahoma has moved a large majority of their workers to remote. So if there's someone here from Oklahoma that knows more about that than I do, feel free to speak to that. But I know that my question to the director was, how are you monitoring that? Because along with that takes a lot of training for supervisors and for employees, and it takes technology. So that we have to have the technology to support that, so we can understand the work that needs to be done and then the work that's being accomplished. So this has opened up a lot of opportunities for states to look at those options, and some of those will result in better efficiencies within our state agencies, and also I think will bring to light what work is really getting, what real work needs to be done and has to be done, and then what work has been done in the past and what's required of that employee. I think at the end of the day, we're going to find that we may not need as many workers, but that's just an assumption that I've made based on just the time that we did spend working, some of our employees working remotely. In our agency, we were in the office every single day during the pandemic, so along with our local offices around the state. So when there was an opportunity, or there was someone at risk, or someone that was compromised, then of course they had the opportunity to do that. We got some experience working in that arena with remote work, but we also recognized the things that we would need in order to do that on a larger scale, and Oklahoma's doing that. So you may want to look into what they're doing.
Thank you for the response, and I want to thank the audience for you participating and asking questions, and of course our panel for your expertise, for being here, and thank you so much. And I know that there's probably a lot of questions still out there, and feel free to reach out to Carl or Dexter for any additional questions on how to contact the panelists here today if there's any questions that still remain. But at this point, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next speaker. We have a presentation on the future of remote work and what state leaders should be prepared for when thinking about how and when, where work will be done in the next years to come. So to provide that presentation for you today, we have Nikhil Galawat of LinkedIn. Nikhil Galawat is a senior data scientist at LinkedIn, where he contributes to labor market research as part of the Economic Graph Research and Insights team. Currently, his work focuses on helping workers build resilience by understanding job transition and upskilling opportunities. Nikhil found his way to LinkedIn through a winding path that brought him through experiences in data visualization, monitoring and evaluation engineering, and field organizing. Nikhil, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that intro, and thank you so much for the panelists for a great discussion. The bar is set very high. I'm going to try to do my best so we can finish strong. My name is Nikhil Galawat. I'm a senior data scientist at LinkedIn, and I believe there's a presentation that should be, yeah, what's the best way to start it? Oh, great. Amazing, there it is. Technology. I work at a tech company, by the way. Great. So I'm going to talk a little today, thank you so much for inviting me here to speak. I'm going to talk a little today about insights that on remote work that we're seeing from LinkedIn's data. So LinkedIn's vision is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. And the team that I'm on, we call ourselves the Economic Graph Research and Insights team, and we hold close to this mission. We are a team of data scientists and economists whose job it is to mine LinkedIn's data to understand the workforce and provide insights to policymakers, to business leaders, to individual workers to help fulfill this mission of creating economic opportunity for everybody in the global workforce. So before we get into specific insights that we have around remote work, I first want to take a step back and talk a little bit about where those insights come from. What is the data that we're looking at that tells us what's going on in the workforce? And it comes from the LinkedIn data ecosystem. And so many of you here probably have a LinkedIn profile. Here's a sample of one of my colleagues who sort of very generously volunteered to be showcased here. LinkedIn is the world's largest professional network. We refer to the totality of the data on LinkedIn. These are, you can think of your profile. You have job history, you have the skills that you know, where you went to school, certificates that you have. We refer to the totality of that data as the economic graph. And building out that economic graph is the way that we operationalize the vision of creating economic opportunity for everybody. It gets stronger, it gets more powerful, the more people that join. And so quite literally, it is connections between different people and companies and schools and skills across the globe. And it's very big. Over 800 million members, 57 million companies, tens of thousands of standardized skills that we can map and compare to one another, 120,000 schools, and billions of connections between those entities, relationships between those entities that allow us to understand what's going on in the workforce. We also think that this data has some unique advantages that make us really primed to present insights on the global workforce. One is that it is global. We have members from across the globe, and we can do analyses that are global or specific to certain regions as interested. It's granular. We have a lot of people, so we can do a lot of, cut up in a lot of different dimensions, look at specific industries, specific job functions. People update their profiles all the time. They're starting new jobs, and they're indicating that on LinkedIn. They're learning new skills, and they're putting that on their profile, and so we kind of know what's happening in real time. And it's historical as well. We keep snapshots of what happened before, so we can look at historical trends. And so all this puts us in a very unique position to be able to hopefully understand the workforce a little bit better and share that with all of you. And we've done this in the past to great effect. We've partnered with institutions like the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations to talk about the future of work, global gender gaps, skills gaps, so on and so forth. A long history of doing this work. And so that brings us to where we're here right now, to talk about the workforce of tomorrow. And to understand that, we kind of have to think about, I guess, where we are today, which is quite different than perhaps where we were 2 years ago or even a year and a half ago. And so how do we think about this? How do we conceptualize what is happening right now in the workforce? And the way that we talk about it at LinkedIn, we talk about it in terms of what we call the Great Reshuffle. And so this is the idea that, disruptions are happening, things are changing, things are moving around. And specifically, we see that business leaders are rethinking their entire working models, cultures, and company values. And on the flip side, employees are rethinking not just how they work or where they work, but why they work. What is their own relationship to work? And they're looking for opportunities that best match their needs, whether it's greater flexibility, better pay, or deeper fulfillment or connection to the work that they do. And so there's a few different lenses that we look at that through. Remote work is one of them, but quickly I want to just touch upon some of the other ways in which that we conceptualize this idea of a great reshuffle. One of them is obviously hiring. And we find that hiring continues to climb across all industries. It's up compared to the same time last year, but still below pre-pandemic levels. And this is according to our own hiring measures using the data at LinkedIn. We call it the LinkedIn hiring rate. Job changes are accelerating. The rate at which workers are changing jobs is a lot faster now. I think this was reflected in some of the comments before. People are changing jobs. They're rethinking their relationship to work. Some of it is people are choosing to leave jobs. Sometimes they are asked to leave their job. And the pace at which people are moving around is accelerating. Migration is another one, so we look at this through. As you might imagine, it dropped quite a bit in the past year. It rebounded, and now it's going down again. So it's fluctuating. We're keeping our eye on it. And not only the pace of migration is changing, but also where people are migrating to and from. All these things are things that we're keeping an eye on in ways we're thinking about this great reshuffle. One thing to note, Gen Z is the most mobile segment of the workforce. I call that out because we'll talk a little bit about Gen Z later on and their specific insights we have specific to them around remote work. And then finally, remote work. So we'll spend some time talking about this a little bit, but at a high level, we had a survey of around 500 business leaders in the US and the UK. And one of the things that we saw was that around 71% of executives felt under pressure to rethink their working models. And employees actually want to remain work. Around almost 90% of employees want to remain in their remote positions most of the time now that they have the opportunity. The ones that have had the opportunity to work remote, most of them want to stay there. So that's sort of setting the stage. So let's take a look closer at remote work and what does the data that we have at LinkedIn tell us about the world of remote work, where it is right now and where it might be going. So one, companies are hiring remote, and by quite a lot. It's growing in nearly every country, and the US especially. The share of remote job postings on LinkedIn has grown from around 2% in pre-pandemic levels to almost 14% today. So this is the share of job posts on LinkedIn that are remote. We now have a feature where companies can basically tag job posts as this is a remote job. So we're using that to get this data. Also a little bit of data science and text mining to kind of go through the description of the text to see if this got ability for remote work, even if it's not tagged as such. As I mentioned before, leaders are adjusting their strategies to this new hybrid workspace. 71%, like I mentioned, are feeling that pressure to adapt their workplace policies to allow for that greater flexibility. But even though they're feeling that pressure in that same survey, 58% of these business leaders were feeling optimistic. They felt that this new flexibility was actually going to be good for their business and good for their workers as well. On the flip side, job seekers want to remain remote. As I mentioned, almost 90%, 87% of employees want to remain remote most of the time. And a full 31%, almost 1 in 3 workers want to be remote full-time if they can. Only 13% or so want to go back to being in person the majority of the time. So large willingness here for workers to remain remote, and companies and business leaders are kind of feeling that, they're seeing that, and they're feeling the pressure to adapt accordingly in order to keep these workers happy and retain them. And so job seekers are also expressing interest in remote work. They are viewing more remote job posts on LinkedIn than ever before. So used to be, before the pandemic, only about 1 in 40 of the job posts views were for remote jobs. Now it's 1 in 3. So huge climb over the last year and a half. And not only are they viewing more remote jobs, they're actually applying to these. So they're not just expressing interest, they're acting upon that interest as well by applying to remote jobs. Around almost 40% of all job applications on LinkedIn are for remote positions, and that's up from under 3% in January 2020. So huge increases. We do see that there are a few industries that are driving these remote opportunities. The rise in remote jobs is largely due to a handful of industries. Software and IT, almost 1 in 3 of the job posts are for remote gigs. Media and communications, about 1 in 4. Corporate services, about 1 in 5. Also, finance and healthcare are, although lower than the other groups as well, all of these have grown, again, substantially since pre-pandemic levels. We notice, software and IT, which is now almost 30%, was below 5% beforehand. And healthcare and finance have grown quite a bit as well. So remote work is really emerging. So not only are we keeping an eye on the interests of remote work, but also the opportunity and interest in remote work varies depending on where the worker is located. We're seeing geographic variations in the interest and expression of remote work. Particularly, smaller cities have become remote work havens with the greatest share of job applications by residents to remote jobs in the past 12 months. So over the past 12 months, some smaller cities are having a higher proportion of their workforce applying to remote jobs than compared to larger cities. So Bend, Oregon, for instance, about 40% of the job applications coming from workers in that region are to remote work jobs. Almost 40% in Asheville and around 35 or so in Wilmington. And this is compared to much lower percentages in some of the larger metropolitan areas like San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, which are all below 20%, which means that fewer than 1 in 5 of job seekers are applying to remote gigs. I mentioned before about Gen Z. A lot of folks are interested in generational differences in the workforce. And so Gen Z is a bit of, they're displaying some interesting behavior here. So on one hand, they are 17%, Gen Z workers are 17% more likely to apply to remote jobs than any other generation. But on the other hand, 41% are back in the workplace full-time or expressing interest in being back in the workplace full-time, and that is the highest of any other generation. So not only are they applying to more remote jobs, but even perhaps when they get them, they're also going back into work as well, which I think what this is might be stressing is a desire for flexibility, right? The ability to have the remote option, but then to go into the job if you would like to. So this is one of the things that we're seeing that's particularly prominent for Gen Z as compared to the other generations. So what does this mean for the future of work? What does this tell us? Well, as I mentioned before, flexibility is becoming a top priority. So employees in the first half of the year, job seekers ranked flexible work arrangements as around the 7th most important thing to them when they were considering moving to a new job. And by the middle of the year, about 6 months later, it climbed to the 4th most important thing. So it's becoming more important. The ability to have flexible work arrangements is becoming more important to job seekers. But it could be a double-edged sword. So remote work might have consequences for work-life balance. Employees at remote-friendly organizations were actually 32% more likely to struggle with work-life balance. So even though there is an expression of interest by job seekers to have this flexibility, and there is a corresponding response by employers to offer more remote work, it doesn't necessarily always lead to good outcomes. We're seeing that if the flexibility of the remote work doesn't done correctly, it could actually lead to employees struggling to balance their work obligations with their personal obligations. And so finding that right balance is going to matter, and it's going to matter particularly for retention, we find. So an employer's ability to prioritize their employees' sense of support and engagement is going to be critical to retaining them. And we found that in instances when employees felt that their employer was striking that right balance and able to offer the right type of flexibility, it had really positive outcomes. Employees who were satisfied with their employer's flexibility were 3.5 times more likely to be able to successfully balance their working obligations and their personal obligations. They're around 2.5 times more likely to report being happy with their employer, and they're twice as likely to actually recommend their employer to colleagues to work there. So if employers can get this right, that means that they can retain their workers and they can probably attract new talent as well. So where does this leave us? Obviously there's still a lot happening right now. We're still in the midst of a changing workforce and in a pandemic. But the way that we see this so far is this could be an opportunity. This great reshuffle could be an opportunity for employees and employers to align around these shared values and common mission that's built on flexibility and on trust, and could end up providing more success for organizations and better career fulfillment for their employees. So we are still in the thick of it. We at LinkedIn are keeping our eye on all these things in remote work, migration, job change, hiring, to see how this plays out. This is where we are right now, and we're looking forward to staying in touch to see how things are going to go in the future. So thank you so much. If there are questions, I'm happy to take them. Yes.
My name is Barbara Evans-Fleischer. I'm a delegate from West Virginia, and I want to start with a smart alecky question.
Please.
This
My
morning.
favorite kind.
What is LinkedIn doing about remote work, and can you talk to us about how that's going where you work?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're doing in terms of remote work, I would say that, so one, I mentioned that we are allowing companies to specifically indicate if a job is remote. That does, I think, a couple things. One is that it obviously makes it explicit in the post for them. It also allows us to study it and make sure that see where things are trending in the right direction, allow us to see which companies are offering the most remote work opportunities, which industries might be offering the most remote work opportunities. In terms of how it is going for us, you're asking?
Oh, yeah.
So interestingly, I will admit that I have a little bit of a biased answer. I mean, more biased than usual, I suppose, if you're asking me about working at LinkedIn. But The team that I work on is actually global. We're all over the place. I'm based in New York. I have colleagues that are in Dublin, some are in the Bay Area, some are in Singapore. And so we've been at this for a little bit, and it is going well. I think that personally speaking, at LinkedIn, they've done a good job about transitioning early on. It was fairly seamless at the beginning. And so I would say that LinkedIn is doing well in this area. I think I've talked to other folks at other companies where they're struggling a little bit more with this. So I think it varies quite a bit. I think some companies seem to be doing it well, and others might be struggling a little bit. But that's a little more anecdotal. Yes.
And can I just add on to that? Is LinkedIn doing anything about the issue of childcare?
So from a company perspective, I believe so. I myself don't have children, so I don't know the full details of it. But I know other colleagues as well who have. I guess I'll speak in terms of your question is probably around childcare for working individuals who are also trying to balance their childcare.
Well, if you're working remotely,
yes.
Well, I mean, childcare is a huge issue during the
Yeah.
pandemic.
Yeah.
And it's an issue if you're going to work and there are no child
Yep.
care facilities that are open,
Yep.
like in Santa Fe, or if you're working at home and all of a sudden you find out, like our panelists said today, that school's going to be closed for a week. And
Yep.
all of a sudden both spouses have deadlines.
Yep.
And so is LinkedIn doing anything, or are you aware of companies that are doing something
Yeah.
for those people who are stuck?
Yeah. It's a great question. So I will say that a couple things. One is that culturally at LinkedIn, there is a strong expression from the top down that people make sure to take care of their family obligations as needed and work with their managers and teams to be able to have the flexibility to be able to do that. And so work will find its way around personal obligations. Another thing is that they're working hard to be able to reopen offices for people who want to go into them. So LinkedIn's policy now is that you can work remotely indefinitely, but an office is open if you choose to come in. And I know that can be helpful for some parents who, especially in New York, where I live, where a lot of the apartments are not built for two adults working together, and their children there as well. And so there could be an opportunity there for caretakers to trade off being able to go into the office to work, while the other one might be have an opportunity to take over child care duties. And they're trying to reopen the offices safely. There's a lot of protocols they put in place to be able to do so. But having a place where people will be able to work, and then having a strong culture of making sure that work will find its way, will find a way to adjust work to make sure that you can fulfill your personal obligations. Here's the question over here. Yes.
Thank you. Could you go back to the slide
Okay.
about the difference between the larger cities and the smaller cities? And
Yeah.
elaborate that. I was a little confused just want to make sure I understood that data.
For sure. Yeah.
That's the job applications. The percentages in that are about the residents in the city as opposed to where they're applying to?
Yes, exactly. So it's looking at where people are located and what types of jobs they're applying to. So for instance, looking at all the folks in Bend, Oregon who applied to jobs over the past 6 months, and seeing what share of those jobs were remote jobs and what share were not remote jobs.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Well, Senator Wellman from Washington State. I have the dubious distinction of being one of the first 100,000 people on LinkedIn. So I've been around for a while.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Just been in tech for 40 years. Looking at what you've talked about, my impression of LinkedIn, my own experience, is that almost everybody I see on LinkedIn, it may be just my view, is a college graduate or in that level. So you're only looking at a very certain perspective, unless I want to know more about, maybe you're doing more than I realize about the rest of the population. But you're either doing, mostly college graduates who are looking for management positions at various levels, and they are reporting on the rest of the population, as opposed to being the people on Monsters who are not filing for, putting up profiles on LinkedIn, I think. And then, are you talking about the idea of Zoom cities, which would be the boys, well, the ones that you've printed there with Bend, Nashville, et cetera? And then is housing any particular issue that you're finding in terms of where people are going and affordable housing and or any kind of housing? Because that's a major issue in the States right now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. So I think I'll work backwards through those questions if I can remember correctly. So in terms of housing, I don't believe that we are doing any research or have insights around that specifically ourselves. It's not, we tend to stick with the data that we have, and we don't happen to have data on housing. I know that we've shared some data or done some partnerships, I believe, with Zillow that have been published in a couple news outlets. I'm forgetting the names. Happy to find them and we can chat about them, but I know that while we haven't done it, I think we partnered with other companies to be able to put our two data sets together around those issues. And I think we've done something with Zillow. Previous question before that around Zoom cities, I believe.
Well, your population, the population you're looking at,
yes.
Are they mostly college graduates, or is there a greater, broader spectrum that you're looking at?
There is a broader spectrum than I think people will often give credit for. However, it will bend in certain directions towards certain populations in certain industries and certain levels of education. One thing that we're stressing hard at LinkedIn is a focus less on education and more on skills. And so what are job opportunities and based upon skills people have and less based upon the education that they may have had the opportunity to obtain. And so skills first hiring. I think there was a comment in the panel about education not necessarily encompassing, or job opportunities not necessarily encompassing the totality of somebody's skill sets. And so we're trying to be able to look at skills first. We're encouraging members of any education level, of any job experience, to tell us a little bit of something about their skills. And we're developing tools and insights that connect based upon skills, not just on college major or past employment, but based upon the skills that you have. What other career transitions can you make, and what skills might you need to build in order to make certain transitions? Some of those may require more formalized education. A lot of them may not as well. Yes. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you. Adam Wool, Alaska House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. I have, I guess, two questions. One is, you stated what job seekers are looking for, mm-hmm. and how does that reflect about the employers and what their preferences are? I have a family member who's a executive at a tech company in Portland, and when working at home, and used to be able to leave the house to go to work and have some break between home and work, and has nonstop Zoom meetings all day, and retiring early. So there may be a disconnect between that type of individual and someone who more does different kind of work all day in front of a computer. That's question one. And part two is, and I don't know if LinkedIn is the right people to answer this, but those of us who have kids that were home during the pandemic wanted nothing more than to go back to in-person learning.
Right.
So when they become job seekers, are they going to remember this trauma and not want to work remotely again? Because I know my kids suddenly love school, and I don't think it's math classes. So they will be applying for jobs, and college students as well, and I don't know as much about them as the younger set. So if you could address those issues, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do my best on some of this. So in terms of remote work is on certainly on the rise as we're seeing. We did see that there could be double-edged swords to it. I don't know if I could probably answer a little bit anecdotally. I know that it would probably depend a lot on, obviously, your living situation, like you mentioned. I can tell for myself that, it's just me in my apartment. I know people who, they have a co-parent and kids, and they're all trying to work from home, and they're probably eager to get back in the office as well, which is why we do see a reflection in the data there. I highlighted Gen Z, but I'm certain it's true to maybe varying degrees for other generations. a desire for a flexible work, so not just fully remote work, but flexible work. And we saw that in one of the graphics, I'm going to forget which one it is, that although lots of, I think almost 90% of job seekers want that flexibility, only 13% want it to be fully remote. And so there are a lot in the middle there where they want the option to be able to do so, hopefully be able to work around their personal obligations, but want to be able to, be able to get away from their kids doing Zoom classes a little bit more. And there was a first part of your question as well that I want to make sure that I get to, but I'm not sure if I remember. I think it had to do around what do employers want? Yeah. So employees obviously expressing interest in more remote work. Employers responding in kind by offering it. I don't know if I have a direct answer to the question about what employers would want, apropos of nothing else. I don't think that we know that. I don't think we have that information in our data, unfortunately.
And we have time for one more question.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Craig Christensen, State Representative, State of Arkansas. We have a rural district where I am, and one of the issues in that rural district is, we hear it in some of the comments through here, but that our constituents growing up in a farming community, they may have a different work ethic than somebody that grew up taking a subway to work every morning or doing this. Mm-hmm. They're not looking for an hourly job. Mm-hmm. They're looking for a career. Mm-hmm. And they want something that they can find that has benefits or the strength that keeps them employed longevity instead of just a short term. Mm-hmm. And so we are redefining the workplace. I can see that everywhere we're going. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that at some point, part of that equation is, are the employers looking for folks that want a career rather than somebody pigeonholed for a short-term job that's then replaced by somebody else? So I appreciate your presentation today. I think it was clear, concise, to the point, but I'm just throwing that question out there to see what LinkedIn is looking at along those lines.
Yeah, so I want to make sure that I understand correctly. So differences between folks and employers who might be looking for longer-term careers versus those maybe moving around a little bit more?
Essentially, but some of the people that are now entering the job force, and it's a crossover between millennials and Gen Z, is they're not finding places that they can go that are offering what they're looking for, which is long-term employment and a career rather than just a job.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things I know that we see in the data. We touched upon briefly the job changes. So people are changing jobs at a higher rate than ever. Some of that, one of the things we can't tell in our data, unfortunately, is why somebody leaves a job. So we can tell that the pace of it is changing. Some of that we can deduce that, over the past year, employers have gone through tough times and have let people go. But even in the rebound, as we're seeing through some of the survey research and also in the data, employees are choosing to change jobs, whether for better opportunities or more fulfilling careers. Employers do want to continue to retain their employees, which I think is one of the reasons that we saw that they are trying to offer these more flexible options. And if they get it right, then their employers do want to stick around, or more likely to want to stick around. And so I'll stop short of providing I think, direct answer to your question. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself in terms of what our data can and cannot represent. But I do take your point. I don't know if we can get it at directly around, differences between longer-term careers besides jumping around. But we do see an acceleration in job changes, but we also see a desire for employers to create opportunities that are going to retain their employees for longer-term careers. Wait, that's helpful. Yes. Thank you very much. I really appreciate all the questions.
Thank you, Nikhil. I want to just once again appreciate everyone for being here, for participating. A big special thank you to our panel and, of course, to Nikhil Galawat of LinkedIn for all of the information that they provided us today. I want to just also once again say that we do have Dexter here and Carl available that could put you in contact with any of the panelists that you heard from today. Once again, thank you, and this ends our session on the workforce of tomorrow.